Welcome to Planet America's Situation Room. I'm John Barron.
I'm Licciardello, and once again, we've got a situation.
Then lawmakers in the House are turning their attention to the Epstein files. The president has called it a hoax.
These emails prove absolutely nothing.
President Donald Trump is telling Republicans to vote to release the Epstein files, saying they have nothing to hide.
With the Epstein scandal engulfing the Trump administration, I'll be speaking to the lawyer for many of Epstein's victims. The legendary Gloria Allred is our guest.
And the MAGA movement's been pulling itself apart, or at least pulling Marjorie Taylor-Greene and Trump apart. Now he says Republicans should vote to release the files.
With the government shutdown finally over last week, an ongoing scandal suddenly reared its head again.
Breaking news, the House Oversight Committee has just released new emails from convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein. Some are focused on President Trump.
In fact, Donald Trump is mentioned in Jeffrey Epstein's emails over 1,000 times, suggesting that for more than a decade after Trump says he cut ties with Epstein, the convicted sex offender was still intensely focused on the president.
In this 2018 exchange, Epstein suggesting he had potentially damaging information on the president, writing, "It's wild because I'm the one able to take him down."
But what might that be? There's a clue in one of the email messages from Epstein to his former girlfriend, now convicted child sex offender Ghislaine Maxwell, from April 2011. That was at a time when Trump was flirting with the presidential campaign and peddling the false Obama born in Kenya conspiracy theory. In this email, Epstein says, "I want you to realise that that dog that hasn't barked is Trump." Then a name is redacted to victim one, who Epstein says spent hours at my house with him. According to the White House, victim one was Virginia Giuffre, who ended her life in April this year. It is important to note that Giuffre does not accuse Trump of wrongdoing in her posthumously published memoir, Nobody's Girl, writing that when she worked at Mar-a-Lago before being recruited by Maxwell to work for Epstein, quote, Trump couldn't have been friendlier.
Although I should jump in right there, John, because one could take that phrase, couldn't have been friendlier, a number of ways, not all of them positive for Trump. But to be clear, Giuffre was quoted in a 2011 article as saying that Donald Trump didn't partake in sex with any of us, but he flirted with me. But then, under oath in 2016, she said, "It is true that Trump didn't partake in sex with us, but it is not true that he flirted with me." Either way, it's notable that Carolyn Levitt didn't actually refute the claims that Trump spent hours with at least one victim.
Did the president ever spend hours at Jeffrey Epstein's house with a victim?
These emails prove absolutely nothing other than the fact that President Trump did nothing wrong.
That's not a denial. Now, some have noted, as you did, John, that Virginia Giuffre's identity was revealed by the White House. Maybe she wasn't the real redacted victim, for all we know. But for what it's worth, the House Oversight Committee did say that Epstein's estate did not redact the name originally in the documents provided to that committee. But the Democrats just redacted that name now before it was released publicly. So the committee is backing up the White House on her identity. They also suggest that the Democrats redacted this name on purpose because they knew Giuffre was on the record as having not witnessed wrongdoing from Trump. So they were trying to hide her identity to spread innuendo about Trump more effectively. Look, we can't know for sure what happened there. You make up your own mind.
Yeah. Meanwhile, Ghislaine Maxwell, who you'll recall is currently serving a 20-year prison sentence for her crimes of sexually abusing and procuring children for Epstein to abuse, told the Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche in August that she had never seen Trump in any inappropriate setting, and added, "I never ever saw any man doing something inappropriate with a woman of any age." Well, following that rather helpful exoneration of not just Trump but every other man she has ever met, Maxwell was moved to a Texas prison farm. As she awaits to see if her request for a presidential pardon or commutation will be granted, her perks include being allowed to play with a puppy.
It was more than just a puppy, John. The prison farm she was moved into didn't even have walls. Sex offenders are not meant to be in prisons without walls. And the many benefits that Maxwell's received include holding private meetings with visitors who are allowed to bring computers with them, so Maxwell could easily have unmonitored communications with the outside world. Kind of a big deal when you're in prison. Apparently, Maxwell's also preparing a request for Trump to commute her 20-year jail sentence. And he's been asked about this so many times, yet he refuses to rule it out. This is Trump's latest non-denial.
President, have you ruled out a pardon for Ghislaine Maxwell?
I haven't even thought about it. I mean, I haven't thought about it for months. Maybe I haven't thought about it at all. You're just asking me a question. But I don't talk about that. I don't rule it in or out. I don't even think about it.
And you can draw your own conclusions from that. Interestingly, John, that very email thread that you quoted seems to imply a cover-up from Maxwell, because in response to Epstein writing that victim won and Trump spent hours at Epstein's house, Maxwell wrote, "I have been thinking about that." Yet, as you said, she told Todd Blanche that she didn't recall ever seeing Trump at Epstein's house. So, look, that's not a direct contradiction. She did say she didn't see him, but it does suggest at least some dishonest slipperiness on her part. And when Todd Blanche replied to his critics on Twitter about all this, he said, "When I interviewed Maxwell, law enforcement didn't have the materials Epstein's estate hid for years and only just provided to Congress." So he was kind of conceding there that the email does seem to contradict her testimony. So who knows what else Maxwell's lying about in return for favours.
Yeah, who indeed. So, Epstein implies something might have happened between Trump and Giuffre, although Giuffre said it did not. But these other comments from the White House press secretary do raise an important question, one that could ultimately go to the heart of this scandal.
And what President Trump has always said is that he was from Palm Beach, and so was Jeffrey Epstein. Jeffrey Epstein was a member at Mar-a-Lago until President Trump kicked him out, because Jeffrey Epstein was a pedophile and he was a creep.
So she says Trump kicked Epstein out of his club for being a pedophile and a creep. Which, if that is true, it begs the question, if Trump knew what Epstein was doing, did he report it to police and potentially spare Giuffre and hundreds of other victims from years of abuse? And if not, why not? Was it because Epstein was, as he claimed, the one able to take him, Trump, down? In 2019, Jeffrey Epstein wrote an email to journalist Michael Wolff, who's written several books about Donald Trump, saying, of course he knew about the girls. In fact, Epstein once called Trump his, quote, closest friend for 10 years. But in these newly released emails, he tells former Treasury Secretary Larry Summers, quote, I have met some bad people, none as bad as Trump. Not one decent cell in his body, so yes, dangerous. In another email to former Obama White House counsel Catherine Roomler, Epstein notes, I know how dirty Donald is. Now, that would be a damning character assessment if it came from anyone other than somebody as indecent as Jeffrey Epstein. And if he's calling Donald Trump dirty, he's probably talking about business dealings, not sex, given Epstein's own proclivities in that area.
Yeah, I think he's almost certainly talking about business when you look at the context of that email. Epstein wrote it after Trump's former lawyer, Michael Cohen, pleaded guilty to financial crimes. And he implicated Trump in that hush money scandal, if you recall. It was Cohen's flipping that prompted Epstein to write, I know how dirty Donald is. My guess is that non-lawyers, New York business people, have no idea what it means to have your fixer flip. So that doesn't sound very sexual to me. And I should also note that email you read out before, where Epstein said, of course he knew about the girls, does go on to then say, he knew about the girls as he asked Ghislaine to stop. So as far as Team Trump's concerned, that's an exoneration of Trump. We should also note that in these emails, author Michael Wolff seems to really have lined Trump up for destruction here. After the Access Hollywood pussy-grabbing scandal, Wolff wrote to Epstein, there's an opportunity to come forward this week and help finish him. And Wolff actually asked Epstein several times in those emails to take Trump out. So we should bear that in mind when considering anything Michael Wolff says, either in the emails or outside them. Also, we should remember some of these emails might be misleading or untrue. Back in 2017, Epstein was asked where he was spending Thanksgiving in one of these emails, and he replied, Eva. presumably at someone called Eva's house, whoever that is. He was asked, who else is down there? And he replied, David Feisal, Hanson and Trump. So some people immediately assumed Trump spent 2017 Thanksgiving with Jeffrey Epstein, even though surely we would have known that given he was president at the time. And in fact, the Trumps did tweet out photos of what they were actually doing on Thanksgiving 2017, and it was something else entirely. Also, some of these emails, they're clearly jokes. Like the email where Jeffrey Epstein and his brother are writing about Steve Bannon, and Epstein's brother writes, ask him if Putin has the photos of Trump blowing Bubba. You know, I don't think that Putin really does have photos of Trump giving some dude called Bubba a blowjob. Apparently Epstein's brother says it wasn't Bill Clinton he was referring to, but it was a joke. Bottom line, what I'd say about these emails, they most reveal Epstein's close relationship with, well, Michael Wolff and Steve Bannon. Sure, he might have been talking about Trump a lot, but he was talking to Bannon and to Wolff a lot. And all three of them seem to be obsessed with Donald Trump. Now, of course, this doesn't mean that Trump's completely innocent. I still haven't forgotten those allegations from former model Stacey Williams last year that Trump groped her in 1993 when Epstein brought her to meet Trump at Trump Tower. The second Trump was in front of me, he pulled me into him and his hands were just on me and didn't come off, she said. Now, maybe that story's true, maybe it isn't. I'm just saying that that story is more damning than any of these emails, and we probably shouldn't be chasing every breadcrumb like a cat chasing a laser pointer, although that's easier said than done.
Yeah, it certainly is. There are still lots of intriguing questions. And then on Friday, President Trump posted this on his social media site, Truth.
I will be asking AG Pam Bondi, the Department of Justice, together with our great patriots at the FBI, to investigate Jeffrey Epstein's involvement and relationship with Bill Clinton, Larry Summers, Reid Hoffman, J.P. Morgan Chase, and many other people and institutions.
There is no indication, however, that those many other people include the person mentioned more than any other person in this tranche of emails, one Donald Trump. And then the president continued.
This is another Russia scam with all the arrows pointing to the Democrats. Records show that these men and many others spent large portions of their life with Epstein and on his island. Stay tuned.
Now, it is also worth mentioning at this point that a president ordering the Attorney General of the United States and the Justice Department to investigate anyone, much less a former president, is highly unusual, indeed inappropriate. The Justice Department has historically been seen as apolitical and certainly not a weapon to be wielded by the president of the day. Yes, that norm was broken back in September when Trump ordered his Attorney General Pam Bondi to charge enemies, including former FBI Chief James Comey, but it's still pretty shocking. Then, within minutes of those posts, Pam Bondi replied,
Thank you, Mr. President. Southern District of New York U.S. Attorney Jay Clayton is one of the most capable and trusted prosecutors in the country, and I've asked him to take the lead.
And then added, without intended irony,
As with all matters, the department will pursue this with urgency and integrity to deliver answers to the American people.
Just for the record, even though this photo exists of Clinton getting a massage from one of Epstein's girls, Epstein says at least 4 times in these emails, John, that Clinton never went to his island. Or as Epstein puts it, Clinton was never, ever there. Never. Quite definitive. And in another email, he says that the security records would probably back him up as well.
Yeah, it is fair to say, though, Chaz, Donald Trump is probably the most media-accessible president in history when it comes to talking to reporters. He takes their questions several times a day on any given day. But since these emails were released, he's been, well, a little bit harder to pin down. On Friday, as the president left an autumnal capital for the warmer climes of Palm Beach, Florida, he was still ignoring the press pack.
What did Jeffrey Epstein mean when he said you knew about the girls? If the Epstein case is a hoax, why are you calling for more investigations?
Quite so. Then, on Air Force One, Trump finally broke his silence.
What did Jeffrey Epstein mean in his emails when he said you knew about the girls?
I know nothing about that. They would have announced that a long time ago. It's really, what did he mean when he spent all the time with Bill Clinton?
And then when that Bloomberg reporter tried to follow up, Trump got downright rude. Probably lucky for Trump that that pool video broke up at that point. Otherwise, him getting into that reporter's face saying, "Quiet, quiet, piggy," could be a mean meme that follows him for some time. Meanwhile, the US House of Representatives is all but certain to vote this week for the release of any files relating to Jeffrey Epstein held by the US Justice Department, including, if one exists, a client list of powerful men who Epstein may have trafficked underage girls to for sex. Republican Congressman Thomas Massie has been one of the drivers of the discharge petition behind this vote, and he says it is going to pass easily, with plenty of Republicans willing to defy the president.
I think we could have a deluge of Republicans. There could be 100 or more. I'm hoping to get a veto-proof majority on this legislation when it comes up for a vote.
And that would then put the matter into the hands of the United States Senate. And if it were to pass there, it would come up to the president to decide whether to try and exercise that veto. Well, faced with that Republican rebellion, earlier today, President Trump performed a remarkable backflip. Posting again on his social media site Truth, House Republicans should vote to release the Epstein files because we have nothing to hide. So it's not a rebellion if he suddenly tells them to do it, but of course he could just release the files himself. He doesn't need Congress. Or has he got another trick up his sleeve, Chaz? Will the Justice Department suddenly turn around and claim, well, it's all been sealed, I'm terribly sorry, we can't release it now because of this new investigation into Clinton and Summers that you just announced on the weekend. So watch this space.
I don't know what's going on, but that is cheeky from Trump. Does he think we won't remember that only last week he lobbied Republicans to take their names off the discharge petition? First he called Nancy Mace, who wisely chose not to pick up her phone. Then he hauled Lauren Boebert into the Situation Room where there are no mobile phones, and Pam Bondi and Kash Patel were lying there in wait for some reason, although apparently that backfired and convinced Boebert there might be a genuine conspiracy to cover something up. Then Karen Levitt tried to spin that browbeating as a friendly, transparent briefing.
Why are White House officials then meeting with Representative Boebert in an effort to try and get her to not sign this petition calling for the release of the files?
Doesn't it show transparency that members of the Trump administration are willing to brief members of Congress whenever they please? Doesn't that show our level of transparency? Doesn't that show the level of transparency when we are willing to sit down with members of Congress and address their concerns? That's a defining factor of transparency.
This is such extreme gaslighting. And if you thought that Levitt struggled to spin this story, you should see Megyn Kelly's attempt to find a reason that people should calm down about this whole Epstein thing altogether.
Jeffrey Epstein, in this person's view, was not a pedophile. This is this person's view, who was there for a lot of this, but that he was into the barely legal type. Like he liked 15-year-old girls. And I realize this is disgusting. I'm definitely not trying to make an excuse for this. I'm just giving you facts. That he wasn't into like 8-year-olds, but he liked the very young teen types that could pass for even younger than they were, but would look legal to a passerby.
Well, thank God she's not making any excuses, or that could be really embarrassing. Also, Trump can act like he's keen to release the Epstein files now, although, as John said, not so keen. He'll just release them himself today. But that didn't stop him going to war with Marjorie Taylor-Greene over the weekend when she suggested that releasing the Epstein files is the easiest thing in the world. Just release it all, she said. Let the American people sort through every bit of it and, you know, support the victims. That's just like the most common sense, easiest thing in the world. And while right now Trump seems to agree with that theory, on the weekend he didn't appreciate her advice because he then tweeted out that he was withdrawing his support and endorsement of, in inverted commas, Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor-Greene. He said, "All I see wacky Marjorie do is complain, complain, complain." I understand that wonderful conservative people are thinking about primarying Marjorie in her district of Georgia, that they too are fed up with her and her antics, and if the right person runs, they'll have my complete and unyielding support. And then It was on. Marjorie Taylor-Greene tweeted out that President Trump just attacked me and lied about me. It's astonishing, really, how hard he's fighting to stop the Epstein files from coming out. That he actually goes to this level. But really, most Americans wish he would fight this hard to help the forgotten men and women of America who are fed up with foreign wars and foreign causes, are going broke trying to feed their families, and are losing hope of ever achieving the American dream. Oh my God, she is so running for president. But then Trump went nuclear on her and gave her, wait for it, a nickname. Although it might have been a dud missile, calling her lightweight Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Brown, because green grass turns brown when it begins to rot. Yep, when you feel like you've got to explain your lame nickname, you know you're onto a real winner. That obviously wasn't going to do that nickname, so he then stole the nickname that Laura Loomer uses instead, and he rolled with that one, Marjorie Traitor Greene. So, John, this is all very unedifying and strange, but the strangest part of all was, it just became too much for me at this point, was when Marjorie Taylor-Greene, of all people, gets on TV and denounces toxic, abusive politics.
His remarks, of course, have been hurtful. However, I have something in my heart that I think is incredibly important for our country, and that is to end the toxic fighting in politics. And this has been going on for years, and it has divided our country, split up friends and families, neighbors, and it's not solving our problems.
I'm sorry, until 5 minutes ago, she was basically bringing Jerry Springer to Congress. I'm going to have to get my bearings here, John.
Yeah, who is that woman and what has she done with Marjorie Taylor-Greene? For more on all of this, I spoke to the lawyer representing more than 24 of Jeffrey Epstein's victims, Gloria Allred. She's probably America's best-known women's rights lawyer, and she's acted for survivors of the abuses of many prominent men over the years. She's got some fascinating things to say about this case, Trump's possible involvement, and even expressing doubts over Jeffrey Epstein's suicide. Gloria, how are the survivors of Jeffrey Epstein that you've been in touch with this week feeling about these latest developments?
Well, of course, they've been going through this for years, even before it became public, as to what Jeffrey Epstein had done to them. So they've been, looking for justice, looking for accountability, and he was going to be prosecuted and face trial. And then he mysteriously died, either by suicide or by homicide. There are different opinions about that. So no trial for him, disappointing. But they really want accountability now by the release of the files, and they want answers to questions they have. In other words, John, they know their own truth about what he did to them, but they would like to know the whole picture. How could this happen? How could Jeffrey Epstein sex traffic and sexually abuse so many underage girls, in other words, children? So it's not just about President Trump. We don't see evidence yet that President Trump did anything inappropriate or wrong other than be a good friend of Jeffrey Epstein for many years. We don't know if there are more in the files. It's certainly suspicious, and they could be voluntarily released, but they're not being voluntarily released. Hence the political battle in Congress to get all the files released.
And Gloria, one of these Epstein emails says that, of course, Trump knew about the girls. If President Trump did indeed know that illegal sex trafficking of children and young women was going on, it would be morally and ethically outrageous for him not to report that, politically damaging as well. But would it be illegal of him not to have reported that?
Well, that's a very interesting question. If he knew that underage girls were being sexually abused, he wouldn't have a legal duty to report it. In other words, he's not what we call a mandated reporter. Mandated reporters are people like Child Protective Services or a doctor, perhaps, or a nurse. If they know they're mandated reporters, they have to report. Is a president of the United States a mandated reporter? No. So you were correct to say perhaps a moral or ethical duty to report. But in any event, there's so many suspicious things along the journey to get to the truth of what happened and why it happened and why it could happen again. This is a long journey. This is only one stop in the road this week, and it's going to be a long road in this journey to learn the truth.
And Gloria, what did you make of President Trump's call over the weekend to suddenly call on his Attorney General to investigate Epstein's ties to Bill Clinton, Larry Summers and others?
Well, obviously this is political, or appears to be political retribution, and they are just along the way yet additional alleged victims of the administration's political retribution. You know, I'm not here to defend former President Clinton or any of the others. All I can say is I'm a person who represents 27 survivors of Jeffrey Epstein. And what I want to say is I am a Democrat, but as most people know, during my 50-year career as a victims' rights lawyer, I've called out Democrats as well as Republicans if they have not told the truth, or if they've been involved in sexually predatory behavior. And so I think we're going to find out quite a bit that we don't know. I'm not willing to say that anyone who's not been charged has committed a crime. I'm not willing to say that about President Trump because I have to see evidence of what he did and then evaluate whether it was a crime. I don't have that evidence, so I can't say that he's guilty. Having said that, it doesn't help that apparently he's been saying it's a hoax, it's a scam, and so forth, and this is by the Democrats. I don't agree. The victims, the survivors, are wanting the release of the file.
Do you think that President Trump or his Attorney General will use this new investigation into Bill Clinton and others as a rationale to say, well, we can't possibly release the files now because it is the subject of a current investigation?
Another great question, because that's possible. So in other words, it could be there's a smear, a political smear, but we won't have any evidence as to anything they've done wrong. But then the defense will be, because it's an investigation, we can't release. So the bottom line is we have to kind of try to get through the smoke and the mirrors and find out really what happened. And that's always different and difficult when politics are involved. It's really a war between the political parties. And meanwhile, you know, the victims can be re-victimized in this war.
Gloria Allred, thank you very much indeed for taking time to talk to us.
My pleasure. Thank you so much. I appreciate it, John.
Surprisingly, the story that many Trump supporters are most upset about this week isn't Jeffrey Epstein, even though we spent 20 minutes on it. It's Trump's position on H-1B visas. MAGA's long hated those visas as they allow companies to bring in immigrant workers to fill jobs that they think should be going to Americans. So they were incensed this week when Trump said this.
If you want to raise wages for American workers, you can't flood the country with tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of foreign workers.
You also do have to bring in talent. When
we have plenty of talented people here.
No, you don't.
We don't have talented people here?
No, you don't have certain talents, and people have to learn.
According to Trump, Americans just don't have enough talent.
It's the free world's favorite show, America Ain't Got Talent. He's a young fast food worker with a dream.
The stage is yours. Good luck.
To be a dancer.
It's fun to stay at the...
One of the worst acts I think I've seen on this show.
An astronomer.
Terrible.
and a competitive eater.
I like it all. It's all good stuff.
Do you want some water or anything before you start?
I think you're going to really injure the lining of your tummy.
And finally win our judges' hearts.
Yes, yes.
3 yeses.
America ain't got talent.
What is the big dream?
I only want to be a dictator for one day.
I hope we all get to witness your dream come true.
And that is all for another trip to Planet America. We'll be back at the same time next week for what will be our final Monday night show of 2025. And yes, in case you're wondering, we will be back in February 2026 for the run-up to the midterms, the start of the long race to the White House 2028.
We're also going to be back on Friday night on ABC News for the weekend edition as well. Both shows are available on ABC, iView, YouTube and Facebook. See you.
Bye-bye.